Hi everybody, it's Adrian Pass here. Surprise, surprise.
Bridget, yes.
And this is number 187. Actually, oddly enough, that's how old I feel this evening.
I think it's to
187.
do with it being very, very cold
I think it is.
in the north of England, probably even colder in the north of Scotland.
Anyway,
pretty cold.
It's
and
very
wet
cold. Any special
everywhere.
things about 187?
I gather there are, Adrian. Our wonderful statistician friend says there are 187 chapters in the Hebrew Torah, the Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses.
Well, how fascinating.
Well, it is pretty fascinating, really. I mean, I just love the idea that every number has a connection.
Oh,
and
so
of
do
course,
I,
for
yeah.
you, because you're so still involved in limericking, it's quite useful, really, because you do have one about Moses, don't you?
That's right, this one is about Moses, and as probably most of you know, Moses actually didn't want to go, like many biblical heroes, and he said all this to God, and God didn't take any notice, and he had to go in the end anyway. So this is supposed to be Moses moaning about the reasons why he didn't want to do it. I'm 80. I lack motivation. I stammer through public oration. Can't some other wreck lead this lunatic trek to a God-only knows destination? But he didn't get away with it. He had to go. He did well in the end, apart from right at the end where he struck a rock with a stick, which is the heaviest sin you can imagine anyone committing, and then wasn't allowed to see the promised land. I don't know.
Well, we asked
There we
for some limericks, and we've received some. Some of
Quite
them are
a
going
lot,
to be
yeah.
for next week.
Yeah.
But this one is also about somebody who didn't want to go and who got pretty fed up with
Oh, yeah.
God on the way. And these are the last 2 verses of this one when he's really fed up with God.
And who is this?
This is Jonah.
Right.
God asked him, "Is it right to be mad?" "Yes, it is. He did strop mighty bad." Jonah stuck out his chin, for the night settled in, but when his plant shelter died, turned sad. "Better that I die than I live now. You even ruddy well saved each cow." This raised God's eyebrow. Joe took a teary bow, whispered, "Love you, but life's hard, and how?" And that's from our chief banana hater, isn't it?
And the great irony about that is that we know this person well enough to know that that last line there, actually, she probably understands, I won't go into it, probably understands it more than most people. That last line was, I love you, sister God, love you, but life's hard, and how? And I tell you what, for that person, that is absolutely true. And that's our chief banana hater. If you ever want to pray for our chief banana hater, you do that. So thank you very much for that.
And then we had 2, didn't we, about Jesus. Both
Yeah.
of them I thought had real charm. There was a young baby named Jesus who now, as God's son, still sees us. He knows what we think and the words we will say, the deeds we will do, but shows us his way. Oh, praise him for his love that now frees us. And the other one, there was a young baby called Jesus who chose not to do what he pleases, but came for the lost, regardless of cost, and intercedes for us all on his kneeses.
His kneeses.
His sneezes.
Right,
Yes,
okay, fair
yes,
enough,
his
yeah,
sneezes.
fair
Well,
enough.
nothing to do with sneezes anyway, but sneezes. And we have got some more next week.
Yeah.
So
People
that's
who've
great.
responded really well with
They
the
have, and
limerick.
please keep them going. They amuse us
Yeah, they
enormously. Well, what an extraordinary week it's been in the UK. And I don't know if there's anybody in the world who hasn't heard about what's happening in the UK this week, last week. In fact, it's something that's been going on for 20 years. But what has happened just recently is that a writer, Gwyneth Hughes, who actually thought her 4-part drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, would just reach a very niche audience because it's on terrestrial TV, has actually, something has exploded in this country,
Surely
hasn't
I think
it?
she spent 4 years working on it,
Yeah,
didn't she?
and actually met met all the characters that the real people that became characters in her drama.
And it's as I'm sure you all know, it's about the fact that between 1999 and 2015, the post office, which is the major owner of the post office, is the government actually, prosecuted 736 postmasters and sub-postmistresses based on information which was false from a computer system called Horizon.
Yeah, and I mean it was faulty. It was just faulty. It meant that it showed up on people's accounts that they had taken huge amounts of money in some case, and every time they tried to correct it, it got worse, and there were terrible consequences. Again, I'm sure everybody knows about this now, really, but people lost their homes, their businesses, people became bankrupt, some people had criminal convictions, one person committed suicide. It's been a scandal that has been unresolved for 20 years and described as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice the UK has ever known. Well, this person who wrote it and thought it was going to be for a niche audience, apparently 3.5 million people have tuned in. Not just on the nights that it was on, but since.
And they're still going. I'm sure that number will go up and up and up.
So what is curious, maybe, and I think a lot of people are asking this, is why the enormous impact now when there have been books and documentaries and the information has been swirling around for years.
I think it was brilliantly written, and there was a huge amount of what we assume, I believe, is accurate research and some great acting, actually. And we would say it was brought to life by the coming through the screen, but there's a combination of things here that is quite unusual, and that is a story that makes you feel something very deeply, and the fact that it's true. You don't often get those things coming together, but in this case it illustrates the extraordinary visceral power of story that it gets into your very bones.
Well, I mean, it made me and probably 3.5 million people actually cry and feel so angry and so stirred up and so wanting something to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, as we know, is why Jesus told stories, because he could have, someone said to him, who is my brother? And he could have said, well, here we are, and doled a sentence out. But what he wanted people to do was to own the consequences of their consideration of the story.
Yeah.
So that at the end, he would ask another question: who was his brother? In one case, and the person who was asked that question didn't even want to say the answer because it went against what he believed.
That's the story of the Good Samaritan.
The Good Samaritan,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was thinking as well about the shock effect that he often had. He knew his audience. So, for example, with the Good Samaritan, he starts, doesn't he? There was a man who was going along a road, and there would have been the gasp because the road that he mentions, everybody knew to be a notorious road. Somewhere you'd never sensibly go on your own. And if you think about the story of the prodigal son, he starts with something so shocking that we can't really get our heads into now. There was a man, he asked for his inheritance. And apparently for his audience, that would never have been done because it's actually wishing your father dead. So the first effect would have been shock right through, right through the screen.
Of course, I mean, Jesus presumably worked in the carpentry where his father was, and met so many people and heard so many stories and got to know how people, families, life works. And these stories obviously came out of that. And I know people in the past have said to me, God gave him the story. Well, yeah, all right, but
you think he'll have honed the story?
I think they are coloured by experience, a human experience, and some of these he must have thought about a long time and thought, as we all do who tell stories. You think is this going to be all right if I put this in it, or am I going to lose my audience if I do it? And I think this ploy of beginning with something that really made people think before you hardly started was very valuable. And in fact, it says in Matthew, doesn't it, which we've quoted before, he only ever told stories.
Yeah. And then, of course, the impact of the prodigal father running down the road, the prodigal father, this very important person risking everything, his dignity, to run down the road and put his arms around the son. It's the story, the prodigal son, that just about everybody knows, and the Good Samaritan,
and
of course.
Even then, and certainly still in churches, people are more convinced that God is punitive than forgiving, and
they were then.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. It's always been the same, and it obviously is one of our favourite stories because it's about the illustration of the fact that God actually, what he wants is to get close to people, not to simply tell them off. It's a gross mistake to lean towards the guilt area. A lot of speakers, you run out of ideas and you make people feel guilty. It's very easy.
But of course, the other thing about this story, Mr. Bates versus the post office, is it is a modern David and Goliath story, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
Where are the Goliaths now? They are these modern systems that are beyond our ability to understand or tackle or fight.
And the Mr. Bates in this case was a man who was also a sub-postmaster.
Yeah.
And he has spent years leading these people and working like mad to get justice for them and some kind of compensation as well. And loads of determination.
But more than that, if you remember, one of the greatest scandals about it was that each person was told they were the only one who was making these mistakes, and therefore it couldn't be the system. And by getting people to join him, one by one, few by few, coming up to over 500, they realised they were not alone. And I think it has to be true that what came through, certainly in the drama, was that of course they needed compensation, and of course they needed convictions overturned. But more than anything else, they needed to find the truth.
Well, some people have been rejected by their communities, treated appallingly by people, and these are people who work so hard to be close to people they work for, and it was outrageous. And you're right, it was the truth that, as far as they were concerned.
Well, I mean, we know people who were and weren't convicted, but the sort of people who are postmasters, sub-postmasters, they're people who care about people. I mean, our sister-in-law was one. The wife of a very close friend was one. They were the people who helped you with your pensions and your pension books and your cards when cards first came in, who sold
quite
you
often
stamps.
kept elderly people's numbers in order to help them.
That's right. The truth, to find the truth. Where had the money gone was what kept coming through. How could it disappear? And I think one of the things, the absurdities of the whole thing that struck me, Adrian, was you're talking about these people. When I say ordinary people, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean just people. And they were treated as though they were master criminals. I mean, for some of them, we're talking £36,000. Where had it gone? I mean, were they such master criminals that they could open an account in some country where it wouldn't be discovered? How do you squirrel away money? It's like expert criminals, and yet it didn't seem to occur to anybody how ridiculous
angry
it was.
Every time I hear about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's right. It was by keeping people separate, and sometimes saying to people, well, if you just say you did it, then you'll get a lighter sentence. So people were going to prison on the advice of. It just makes me so mad.
It does. But interestingly, back to Jesus again, it was, I mean, what were those things that he said? The truth will set you free.
Yeah,
and it is the truth that hopefully will set these people free eventually. But it's too late for some people. Either they've died or it really isn't going to count too much for them. But I mean, that phrase, the truth will set you free, it was this, it's so central to what Jesus stood for, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, it's one of those words that can be very pulpy, truth. But actually, to deal in truth is one of the reasons why people found Jesus very difficult, as well as very entertaining and all the other stuff. He was determined. He was going to tell the truth.
And we all know that's not that easy.
It's really not easy, no. I mean, we get away with loads of stuff, don't we?
Well, we get away with fudging. And I think that's one of the things that's come through this whole situation. Truth has been fudged and smudged and manipulated.
Yeah.
And it is very easy to apparently be telling the truth, but actually to be manipulating the truth, isn't it?
It's been very easy for me, very interesting for me lately. I mean, I've always loved listening to people talking, but I'm really in the habit now of saying to people, tell me what you mean by what you just said. Tell me how that happened. And when you use a phrase that is part of the jargon, just leave the jargon and tell me what happened inside you. And you often arrive at a truth that is really quite different from the truth expressed by a cliche.
I think we were talking
experience.
last week, weren't we, about how easy it is to say we should forgive. And we're told to forgive. Therefore, surely we are forgiving. But the truth has to go way back to the reality of what it is that you have to forgive. And the pain that is scratched onto you through that thing. So just glibly saying it. But in this case, it is something really special that is finally happening, that the truth is being told. And you can see it in the documentaries with the actual people, not the actors, just what it means to finally be heard.
Yeah, to have the truth over them like a banner. I was just thinking then about Jesus going into the wilderness and to discover the truth about himself. And
that's interesting.
And having three major challenges. Not the devil rather urbanely asking him if he could resist the temptation and Jesus waving it away, but actually saying, I have such power in my hands. Can I use it for myself? I could do tricks. I can fall off a mountain and I'll be saved in midair. I could have women, money, because I have the power. So what am I going to do with this? In my heart, what do I want most? And it's the question we all face. I mean, not quite like that, but we all face the question about who we actually are when it comes to it.
But and I was thinking, we had an email just before Christmas, which we haven't read out, but to me, this symbolizes what can happen when you're not alone. You don't think you can make a difference. You don't think you can really do anything. You don't actually think you've got any power. But it was to do with the power of doing something good, just getting on and doing it. And I'm going to read you the email. This is somebody who's really been poorly and doesn't really feel that she's got a lot to contribute. And she says, I've had long COVID for over 18 months and found it quite debilitating and life-shrinking. I've stopped going to a church regularly, but still attend a group during the week. And we've recently put together a Christmas hamper for the local food bank. And our local food bank at the cafe where I help as a volunteer did exactly the same thing. I took it to a collection point, and as I was shown round the rooms full of food and toys that have been donated through an outpouring of love and generosity from the local community, I felt suddenly a part of something bigger, as though I was connected to a greater force for good. It was a glimpse of hope for those individuals and families who'll receive them. And I was reminded that among all the bad news, there are people making good news and it felt good. And of course it will have made every single person who've had to go through the humiliation of going to the food bank and asking for help and feeling failures. It will make them feel they're not alone, they're special, something really good happening.
Yeah.
But I was so struck by this email because it's so easy to feel that there is nothing we can do against the Goliaths of bad news that we're being overwhelmed by every day.
Yes, it's one of the great paradoxes of faith and life that although, as all the Psalms, many of the Psalms say, why do the wealthy do so well? And
why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah, why do bad things happen to good people? But there is a huge, strange, mystical value in the good that is done. I'm absolutely sure.
And this is the good done by the community, not just the church, the community. Yeah. Each person bringing something in, and as I say, we had it certainly in our people just bringing stuff in. They don't want any fuss. They bring it in, they dump it, they go.
I love watching people in the supermarkets too. There's a box, isn't there, for donations for food or anything that they want, and people just quietly go up and drop stuff in there.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
So there's so many things going on at the moment, but I think for all the Davids looking at the Goliaths around them, maybe we have a little more that we can do than we think we can. And certainly the writer of this drama and the actors involved, Toby Jones, says he cannot believe what has happened out of something that was essentially a drama.
So Jesus might have been right about the story then.
And about the truth.
You never know.
Yes.
You know, but I'm sure he's thrilled to hear me say that.
Yes. And on that note,
we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.